where are you at in your life and your reserve career the first time you decided to go overseas?
Well, the first time I decided to go overseas was in 2002, and I'd been the Deputy Commanding Officer of the Service Battalion for about a year. And I knew I was in succession to be the Commanding Officer, and we'd sent quite a few people to both on Op Harmony and the following operation, which started out as Palladium. So I figured, well, if I'm going to be the Commanding Officer, I should know what these guys are going through and do my bit. So I put my name in for that I'm willing to go, and lo and behold, it came back in no time flat. Okay, you're going over as the multinational division LO to Headquarters S4. So I deployed there in fall of 2002, September 2002 was Palladium 11, and I split my time between Banja Luka and Sarajevo. Although the balance of my time was spent in the headquarters in Sarajevo. I actually had two bunks, one in Sarajevo and one in Banja Luka. But I was essentially the DIV's eyes and ears in Headquarters S4, and to wrinkle out the inevitable operations problems that come in. And with a headquarters that size, there's the inevitable having a guy in there to sort things out on behalf of the formation. Really clears things out. In this time, so 2002, 2003, obviously 9/11 had happened. So as we get there just at the first anniversary of 9/11. So everybody was uptight. I think they weren't fearful, but they were maintaining a cautious posture, which and rightly so. So that passed by without incident. I got to my duty station and did my handover with the incumbent, and very quickly realized that not allies are kind of created equal. Some of the more familiar faces carried a lot more weight and things like that. One of the prime things I had to do daily was to brief the JOC in the evening as to what the DIV had been up to that day. Future operations, what was happening during the day, where are your forces deployed. And one of the things that caught me off, well, I don't know that it so much caught me off guard, but it surprised me, is I expected people to be doing smart operational briefs, and some of the other divisions, their LOs were just reading off a list as to what we did this day. And I said, this isn't right, because it's not giving the audience the information it needs. So I dutifully went back into staff college mode, and as part of my brief, I had our whole AO laid out on the screen with changes in forces and showing proposed operations. And what surprised me most is, as a Canadian, I thought this is pretty standard, and everybody's going, oh wow, you're the first one to ever do this, and I'm going, really? I mean, this makes no sense to me. So most of my time there, by then the theater had become a pretty stable environment. The main things we were focusing on were the op harvests, which are the collection of weapons and ammunition in the various towns, or that get turned in, or you go out looking for the stuff. The organized crime kind of related stuff, human trafficking, going out searching, conducting operations, looking for the PIFWICs, the persons indicted for war crime, and the other things like that, maintaining the normal status patrols. So one of the big things I was involved in there was, and I'll just relate one, because there was a lot of little things going on, and they were more of a routine nature. But near the end of the tour, there's actually two things. During inspection of a weapons cantonment site, they'd noticed that there was some things missing, and they'd later located aircraft engines being smuggled out of the country to go to Iraq, and this is just before the Americans invaded. So there was a big success story there. The other one, and a lot of folks who were there will remember in our AO anyway, a little town called Priador, which caused us no end of aggravation. So our commander, who was British Brigadier at the time, Farker, he planned an operation to go into there and the surrounding area, mostly to go after the PIFWICs, but also the organized crime. There was a certain hotel in Priador which this was centered on, and the name escapes me now. And we'd spent, probably the better part of 2 weeks planning this operation. And what impressed me the most about that was the availability of resources to you. And because I was located in the headquarters, I had air guys coming to me and say, hey, and one of the air guys was a US Navy guy. And he says, I've got some patrol planes sitting off the Mediterranean. We can have them come in and do overwatch for you, and do the sensory stuff. And we had all kinds of things like that going. And it was very successful. We corralled a lot of folks out of there. I was pretty much an individual augmentee as opposed to going out as part of the battle group. I more belonged to the NSC at that time. So although I wasn't part of the NSC, the NCE, because I was actually in the Div headquarters. So when I came back, we came back on a civilian aircraft by ourselves. And so when I got home, the airport was my wife and my kids. And that was pretty much the sole extent of that. I had a week off, and it was right back to work at the time. And I was lucky that I'd scheduled my time off for that. Yeah, so that's one of the big things that hit me though after I got back and I started going back to work. In my civilian work, all of a sudden the problems that people were concerned about just really didn't seem to matter because they seemed so minuscule. One of the big things I noticed, and that you missed, and you don't really realize it as a reservist until you're on full-time duty, was that sense of cohesion that gets built when you work with these people day in, day out, 24 hours a day for 6-7 months. And I don't know that it's a PTSD kind of thing, but I know I missed that. I missed that cohesion of the group I was with, plus the fact that we were doing something that mattered. That was kind of the big thing that hit me there. So that was it. I came back in March of 2003, like a third week of March. I can't remember the exact date. And then, like I said, a week later was back to work, and I had to readjust to what matters in civilian life in order to deal with my everyday work related stuff.
So I'm just curious, how old were you when you decided to go to Bosnia, and what did your family think when you told them the news?
Okay, so 2002, I would have been 42. My wife was worried about it. She told me she knew it was going to come sooner or later. She wasn't too keen on it, but she knew she'd been with me for the better part of 15 years at that time. So she kind of knew that what's expected. With my kids, the youngest fellow the young guy was 12. My daughter was 14 at the time, and they were both in the same high school. Daughter didn't affect her too much, but the young guy, as soon as I'd left, and I kept in touch with my wife, he was having some challenges in school, and I said, well, you just can't let it go. I said, you have to talk to the teacher. So she went and talked to his homeroom teacher, and the school he went to was their principal. His dad was a company commander in the Calgary Highlanders in World War II. So they were very engaging with this. But the even better part is my son's homeroom teacher was an Army brat. So he'd been in Germany. He knows what's going on, and so he was very, very helpful to my wife for that. And I think that's a critical thing because he knew. We could have easily had someone else who didn't know and couldn't relate to it. So anyways, he sorted him out in a matter of about 3 to 4 weeks, and all of a sudden from his first year in high school being lackluster, starting out lackluster, booms, by the time I came back home on my HLTA, yeah, he was pulling his weight again. So I consider myself very fortunate that at that critical, grade 7 level, that my son had this guy as his homeroom teacher.
What was it like? You just said you came home for your HLTA, but then you had to go back overseas. How was that difficult at all?
I wouldn't do that again. And I came back. I thought I was doing a good thing. I came back at Christmas time. But one of the things that that became very, very obvious to me, and my wife expressed it to me when I got back at the end of tour. She said, you know, it was nice to see you come home. It was good to see you come home. But all that stress we got when you left at the beginning of tour started all over again. And it upset the whole apple cart. So in hindsight, I thought to myself, okay, well, if I get an HLTA again, I'll go somewhere else. I won't come home and upset the apple cart. And I understood that, because she had everything going and running to a routine, and then all of a sudden I come back and, you know, for 2 weeks, goof up the whole routine, and then boom, take off out of Dodge again. And I can understand her frustration with that.
You talked about not all NATO officers are created equal, but from a professional development point of view, what was it like for you working with Brits, Americans, whoever in Bosnia at the time?
Well, with the Brits and Americans, we talk the same talk. We understand each other. The Americans like to plan to minute details, and Brits still kind of think we're colonials. But you know, we're close enough along the same lines as training and doctrine and the way we operate that to mix in is not a big deal. In the JOC at the time, there was a number of watchkeepers who came from some other nations that were not Brit, Canada, UK. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is the force JOC, and the moment the briefing's over, the first thing that goes up on the screens are the music videos. And I thought, really? You know, you guys are supposed to be focusing. So there was the S4 commander, just to relate to this, changed in October of 2002 from General Sylvester to, oh gosh, I can't remember his name. Anyways, neither here nor there. And there was an incident where one of our patrols in RAO had found somebody was building his own armored vehicle. So that caused a bit of a stir. It was reported, as it should have been. It went up the line, it was briefed, and this happened just before the new general come in. So the new general's come in, he's being briefed by his staff, and he comes in unannounced to the JOC and looks at the JOC watchkeeper, and I just happened to be sitting in the back because all the LOs sat in the back in a little corner, you know, to be not seen and not heard until asked. So anyways, the general comes in and he goes, where's this alleged armored vehicle that somebody's building? And the JOC watchkeepers kind of look at each other, as is, what's the general talking about? And I'd heard this in the back of the room, my ears perked up, and I stood up and I said, oh sir, I'm the LO for that division, I can show you exactly where it was. And luckily I still had my file folder with it, so I could show them the photographs and that. But I thought, geez, you know, you're the watchkeeper. You're supposed to be up on everything. And so that's kind of one of the things that struck me. And it was a note to myself, you know, for when I get into those kind of positions where I may be in charge of an organization like that, that has to conduct operations, that you want to make sure that the guys you're putting in there as duty officers and watchkeepers understand what their responsibilities are and how important it is.
So to what extent, you explained at the beginning why you wanted to go. To what extent did it meet your expectations and what you'd hope to get out of it?
It's hard to say because I didn't really have any expectations going into it. I kind of looked at it more like a duty, I think, is probably the way to go. When I come back out of it, there was a lot of experiences in it. You know, the value of my training became blatantly obvious at all levels, and the quality of training that you know a Canadian soldier gets, regardless of rank level, and you know the ability to form those relationships. And what became blatantly obvious to me is, especially in a headquarters like that, it's about the face-to-face. I mean, we had all the electronic gizmos, we had email and all that stuff, but if you wanted something done and done quickly and with minimal friction, for lack of a better word. It's you walk down the hall and you go talk to a guy face to face and tell him what you need. And that was one of the most important lessons I got out of that. The other thing too is to see the resources that you're actually dealing with, and you know, the ability to project force that you do have, and that stuck with me. You know, that was kind of the key thing. The other part of it, and one thing that struck me after I'd been there for a while, and you think, here's this country that's essentially been, you know, I won't say flattened, but I don't know if raped's the right word, but that's the illusion it gave to me. And I'm thinking, you know, in the early 80s there was an Olympics here, and you look at this country now, and if you just look at the countryside itself, you think, you know, forget about what's happened, forget about all the blown in buildings and the minefields. You know, this is a beautiful country, you know, and this is what happens when things go wrong, when people do not take their citizenship properly. And minefields brings back another thing. I mean, the place is lousy with mines. It took me about 6 to 8 months before I could mow my lawn. It was so ingrained in you not to go off the hard pack, right, that I could not walk on grass for about 6 to 8 months afterwards. And that's, you know, that's a self-preservation thing, obviously. But that's some of the things that hit me the most out of that. The professionalism is what really sticks, and the need to be professional in what we do.
What are the circumstances around your second deployment?
Okay, my second deployment, this is 2006 now, and I was DS at the Staff College, Reserve DS at the Staff College, and there was an opportunity. Any DS interested in going to USCENTCOM headquarters as the Canadian LO for Op Athena OEF. Hey, that sounds interesting. I'll put my name in for it. And it was a short tour, because what it was is one guy was finishing, and Colonel Hope, who had been commanding the battle group, was supposed to come in and replace him. However, he's still in a major gunfight, and so they needed about 3 months for him to, you know, hand over the battle group, come home, change command of his battalion, and then move his family. So I was there for 3 months. So my function, again, another liaison function, but it was essentially, I was the Canadian Forces LO to U.S. Central Command in Florida. And it was among the same things. There was 3 of us there. I was actually the Chief of Staff. And we had a Canadian Naval Commander who was the Task Force Tampa Commander. We had a Major who was an INT officer, and of course he interfaced with the CJ2 and CENTCOM, and obviously a clerk to look after us. So one of the things, when I got down there, the guy I relieved was an Air Force navigator. And as he had briefed it to me, I'm thinking, okay, so I was expecting a little more warfighting to this, and it was kind of briefed to me that this is very routine. You're just passing information back and forth to CEFCOM at the time. So I got into my routine, and I started, you know, I would read the Canadian sit reps from Afghanistan every day, first thing in the morning. That was my very, very first duty. Information I had to pass back to CEFCOM I had to attend all the briefs in CENTCOM headquarters, and do the summary of that on a weekly basis of the major things happening in all of the CENTCOM AO. So I'm there for about 3 weeks, and the battle groups hand over. There's still a lot of fighting going on in theater. And as I'm reading the sit reps, one of the things I notice is, I'm going, you know, the NSE is reporting we're running low on artillery ammunition for the 777s. And I'm reading this day by day, and I'm going, okay, I don't see anything coming that this is getting rectified. So I went to the task force commander, and I'm going, you know, I'm a little concerned about this. I said, you know, as an Army guy, when you start running out of artillery ammunition, I get real concerned. especially when you're still in a big gunfight. So he says, I don't know. He says, call CEFCOM in Ottawa and see what they know about it. So I told him, I said, hey, look, this is happening in the daily sit rep. I said, are you guys aware of this? So I said, you doing something about it? I said, do I have to do something about it, or do I have to be prepared to do something about it? So the desk officer who I talk to on a regular basis, he goes, oh no, he says, don't worry. He says, it's in process of getting there. So for about another week and a half, I watched this, and it's going, still reporting, you know, these natures are now critical. These natures are now critical. And I went back to my boss and I said, you know, this is something we got to be concerned about. And he said, well, what did CEFCOM say? I said, they said the stuff is going to theater. And so the next day, and it was the Monday of the week before the Labor Day weekend. And sure as heck, I get this panic call from CEFCOM. They're out of artillery ammunition. We need some from the Americans, and we can't get it from them over here because of a number of friction points. Can you do something? So there was a number of contacts I'd established in CENTCOM headquarters, and I went to the J4 in the Coalition Coordination Center, and you know, we need to get some artillery ammunition. Then I went to J4 multinational, and they just, can you do this for us? No, I can't. Why not? Well, the only way I can get this for you is if I get a superior commander's write-off. He says it's got to be at least a 3-star level. He says, or you can go through a foreign military sales contract. So for the better part of the week, I went back and forth and back and forth. I talked to everybody in that headquarters who'd listen to me, and it was no. And then the J4 multinational logistics, and I was just about ready to deck this guy one day. I said, look, because we went back and forth on the foreign military sales thing. I said, look, there has got to be a way to this. And by now it's the day before the Friday of a long weekend. And he goes, the only way you're going to get this is if somebody in the Pentagon gives me the release authority. I said, who? He says, well, you'll never get hold of him. I said, who? Give me a name. Okay, so I got a name. And now by this time, not only CEFCOM's getting on my case, we need this ammunition. Now CNOSCOM I'm talking to them as well. And I wound up actually talking to the NSE in theater as well. So anyways, I finally get this contact, and I said, you watch. So I phoned back to CNOSCOM, and I said, does anybody in that headquarters know this guy? And so they asked around, we'll get back to you. And I said, because this guy's the key to unlock this whole puzzle. I said, if my J4 guy gets the release authority from him, I said, no problem. But he seems to think you're not going to be able to get a hold of him. So lo and behold, the general who was commanding CNOSCOM said, oh yeah, I know that guy. I worked with him before when I was in CDLS. He says, I'll call him right now. So within the space of about 3 hours, right, all of a sudden, this my buddy in J4 multinational logistics phones me up and he goes, I don't know how you did this, but you got your release authority for the amounts you've asked for. It was, I forget how many pallets of 555 and fuses and charge bags, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He says, I don't know how you did this. He says, but I've got the release authority. He says, and I've been told that I'm supposed to deliver it to you wherever you want it. And I thought, okay, so we went back and forth with this for a week. I mean, really? There's got to be an easier way. And so I said, you've got that release authority on your system, right? He says, yep. I said, can you send that to me? Because I had the Canadian secure system. I had the 3 American secure systems that I had access to at the time. And I said, can you give that to me? So I made sure I had it in my hot little hand. And then I made sure Canada had it in its hot little hand, so that there was no, oh no, you can't have it. And that came from the highest level. So I saw it as a success, but I'm thinking it didn't have to be this way. And that, yeah, I'm glad I got it done, but I didn't think it should have to be that way. Okay, lesson learned, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a bizarre way to have something that's so critical as artillery ammunition to make that kind of to rectify the situation, you know.
Well, and one of the things that might explain that is you have to remember this is summer of 2006, okay? CENTCOM headquarters is fighting on two fronts. It's got the theater in Iraq going, and it's got a theater in Afghanistan going, and little other bits and pieces all over the place. And my impression, and this is strictly my impression, is that in CENTCOM, Iraq was the big show. Afghanistan, yeah, okay, we toppled the government, things are going not too bad there. It's a sideshow. And again, I don't know that. That's just my impression of it from the outside looking in. So I can understand it in a way, but you know, how do you explain it? But again, just by email, I wouldn't have got no answers. I had to literally go and get people's faces to get things done.
So I'm curious to know, like from your vantage point there in CENTCOM headquarters, and you're looking at the Canadian sit reps from theater, and this kind of long, hot summer of combat and casualties and things like that. What was the mood, the Canadian mood, in terms of the progress of that campaign that summer?
Well, and again, I didn't get much of a sense of that from where I was sitting. But again, going back to first principles, I'm thinking as I'm reading this stuff, come on, you guys, right? As now that I've been a staff college student, I commanded a service battalion, and I'm DS. I'm going, how do you let your natures get to that low level in the first place, right? When you start a fight like that, you use historical expenditure rates, and you adjust them as they go. And I think, and again, this is just my interpretation of it, but I think we'd forgotten a lot of stuff that had to be relearned. And that happens every time you go to a different conflict. And when Ian Hope came, when he finally got up there near the end of my 3 months, this is one of the things I asked him. And I said, what the heck's going on with that supply chain? I said, didn't you have your echelons? He says, no. He said, the NSE was supposed to come bring that stuff forward. He said, and it wasn't working. He said, luckily, I still had a few warrant officers with Germany time who understood the A1, the A2, the B echelon. And he said, luckily, I still had 3 or 4 of those guys, and I took them out of their positions. I sent them back to the B echelon to rebuild the A1, the A2, and the B. And he said, once we'd got it up and running again, it was effective. And I said, so you're telling me with this FSG stuff and all this, because that was the new doctrine at the time, I said, you're telling me we threw the baby out with the bathwater? And he goes, yeah. And that stuck with me when I went back to the college as DS, being that I was one of the CSS DS, is I made it very, very clear to understand how the replenishment system works, how the echelon system works, right? And all of that stuff. Yeah, doctrine is there for a reason. Doctrine is not, you're not a slave to doctrine, but doctrine is there as your framework, and you adjust it to the situation. And wholesale trying new things, I'm not saying you don't, but maybe a war isn't the place to go trying out new things wholesale, you know, without a proof of concept somewhere.
I'm curious, what were your impressions of Ian Hope when you met him? Sort of, what kind of shape was he in after that whole campaign?
He got there about a week before I left. So other than doing handover stuff, you know, we really didn't spend a lot of time together. But the impression, he looked like a tired guy. I mean, Jesus, I would be too. Commanding a battle group with a big AO like that, you know, in a combat theater, I'd be tired too. But again, he looked, you know, physically looked like a healthy guy to me. You know, he was still going out doing his PT every day, even in the heat of Florida, and so, you know, I saw him a couple of years later, and he looked pretty good to me. So I understand think I understand why they sent him there as part of, okay, you've done the hard lifting, take it easy for a bit. But again, I don't know, and it'd be guessing on my part. But you come from something such high intensity, emotionally, physically, mentally, and then, booms! Now you're going from one extreme to the other. And I think you got to be very cautious when you put somebody into that. I understand the reasoning behind it, but I think you got to be very cautious of that's the right place for that individual at the time. And my understanding is that he wasn't actually there that long before they sent him off to the War College in Carlisle.
Any other lessons that you figure you learned from this experience?
Well, one of the things, one of my other jobs in CENTCOM was to go with our intelligence officer to go to the CENTCOM J2 briefs every morning. And I didn't go every morning, but there's some mornings I'd go with them. And the CJ2 at that time was a guy named Brigadier General Custer, who actually was a distant relation. And he was a very, he knew his job, but he didn't come across as a general. He came more across as a fellow officer than, I'm the one star in charge of J2 in CENTCOM. So there was all the analysts from Iraq and Afghanistan in there, and we sat at the back. There was us and the Brits, and we were the only ones that had access in there. The Kiwis didn't, and I can't remember if the Aussies did or not. I don't think they did, but us and the Brits were allowed in there. So they're briefing away, and this is when Colonel Hope has still got a heck of a gunfight going. And one thing in the couple of briefs I was in there, it's going, well, in Afghanistan is what I paid particular attention to. Well, in this AO, yeah, there's this going on. In this AO, there's this going on. And then the analyst for Kandahar would stand up and say, okay, Canadians are doing this, 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 this. And he turned around and he looked at his staff and he goes, are the Canadians the only ones doing anything in Afghanistan? Are they the only ones taking the business to anybody? He says, let's get on this. He says, they can't be the only ones in there. So that was one of the things, and the layers of security just to get into that skiff, just to get into that building alone was a major effort. So that was pretty interesting. And then kind of the final thing I dealt with there before I handed over to Ian was General Fraser had decided he needed tanks. And so again, it was one of these. Okay, here's the lift request. We want to air move these, and we can't get the Antonov, and so here's the lift request from the Americans we need. So okay, being the judicious staff officer that I am, I said, okay, here's the route that this request has to come. I said, but I've got it, and I will walk it down to the air movements guys in the J4. So I walk it down there and I said, this is what we need. We're moving a squadron of tanks, associated echelon vehicles, engineer vehicle, ARV, blah, blah, blah. Here's the numbers, where they are, when they got to go, et cetera, et cetera. I said, here's the advanced copy of the request. I was thinking like a Canadian staff officer. I'm going to go talk to the guy. Here it is. This isn't a formal request. This is just so you can start your staffing process. And it was an American Air Force staff sergeant. He says, oh, okay, sir. So he takes that thing and he comes back, and I get a phone call from him the next day. He goes, yeah, your first lift has been approved. And so, I went, wow, that's fast. I said, I haven't even seen it come from my side yet. And so the next day or 2 days later, he phones. He says, I got another request for the same thing. And I said, what? He says, yeah. He says, you guys are giving me two of the same. I said, I'll come down and take a look. So I come down and I said, well, yeah, these are the same requests. He said, sir, this is the one you gave me. This is the one that just showed up. I said, okay, whoa. I said, this was an info copy just for you. It didn't require to be action. It was strictly for staff planning. I said, this is the actual formal request with FinCos, blah, 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 all that other stuff. So, yeah, that kind of got it sorted out, but that's how I left, starting moving tanks to Afghanistan. So in 3 months there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of little stuff going on as well. Counter IED I was involved in, the counter IED working group, and anything else the boss decided that I needed to sit in on. The weekly CENTCOM briefs where they briefed General Abizade, I was in on those, yeah. So that was a very, very quick 3 months. An interesting thing one of the Danes said to me, and because I briefed that, okay, Canada's sending tanks, and the Danish general had come to me and he says, you guys have just unveiled the elephant in the room. You've just turned the key in the lock. Everybody else has been thinking this, but nobody else has been wanting to do or say we need tanks. He goes, you guys have just done it. Thank you. So I thought, second and third order effects, right? I thought.
What was it? Do you remember what the justification was from General Fraser for tanks in Afghanistan?
He didn't justify that to me. I just got it from CENTCOM saying, we're sending tanks, we need the lift. That's pretty much what I got. And my understanding from reading the DSRs and that, if you read between the lines, is because the cannons on the labs couldn't penetrate the huts, right, or the walls. They needed something bigger, and a 105 tank round just happened to do the trick, until the new Leopards came.
You said the Americans are at this time they're focused on things going down the toilet in Iraq. What was that like? What was their mood like with respect to Iraq and where it was going, and what did it become by that, sort of 3 years into that war?
It was tough for me to judge, because in the American officers I dealt with, and it is probably much the same as what we do, you're not looking at, when you're dealing with an issue, we teach you to think second and third order effects, probably that you have little effect over anyway. But again, they're focused on, it's their guys over there in the shit, right? So that's what they're concerned about. What I did notice is in the higher levels, the air component, the land component, maritime component briefs, is sometimes an unduly rosy picture got painted, or at least what I thought was an unduly rosy picture. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to follow through after I left on what the sit reps said and what actually happened. But that's kind of one of the things I thought. The other interesting thing is what I did notice is a lot of times prior to operations that Canadians were participating in, be they as a supporting force or being the supported force, when there was one time that 2 carrier battle groups were diverted to as close as they could get to Afghanistan, to have their carrier air wings close to support the theater. That's one of the things that impressed me. So you kind of get both sides of this. You get, and again, I think it's based on personal interactions amongst professionals that, you get some guys that, boom, stuff happens, and other guys that are just, in a rut, for lack of a better word, and they kind of hit a wall. So that's kind of one of the big things that struck me there.
And then you finally get to go to Afghanistan. What's your family think about that?
Well, it was funny when I asked my wife if I can put my name in for this, and she says, "Yeah, go ahead," just like that. She said, "When you went to Bosnia," she said, "I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach," and she says, "Now," she says, "I don't have that, and there is no trepidation whatsoever." So, yeah, cool. So how the task initially came is to the Staff College again, as a DS mentor to the ANA Staff College in Kabul. And it initially was supposed to be for their final exercise. So it started out as a TAV. To make a long story short, as far as the time, is we were extended because there was a number of things to do for the next course. They wanted to stay on. So it wound up being a very short tour. And I had been trying to actually get to Afghanistan for a long time, and I was always getting, no, somebody else was going. So I'll take it. Luckily, I got to stay there a while longer. So what the job was, and I was there was 5 of us going over, 5 DS, and I was the team leader. There was myself, Tim Carter, Singler, Chris Hatfield from the Argylls, because he was still a major then, and 2 guys from the Signals whose names escape me right now. But anyways, our job was to go over there, and they had set up a staff college by U.S. contractors who are teaching the MDMP program. And it's essentially they're taking air-land battle and trying to teach air-land battle to these Afghanistan junior staff officers. And so we get there, we get into theater, and we clear in through Kandahar, get all our kit, get in the plane up to Kabul, and that's where we were. We were in Camp Sutter in Kabul. And so we'd make the daily run from camp down the highway into town, into the staff college, and we were there essentially to mentor the DS for their syndicate. And initially, when you walk in, you think, well, this is kind of set up like Kingston, until you hear what's going on. And I'm sitting there, and what became blatantly obvious to me, and I probably wasn't familiar with the culture as I could have been. But one of the things from a learning point of view that became obvious to me is these guys are not learning, now understanding the different learning styles and stuff. But their instructor, who was an Afghan lieutenant colonel, and he had a 2IC who was a major who didn't want to question him, but this Afghan lieutenant colonel would he'd feed him and talk and tell him, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. And it was that, I don't quite know the proper word I'm looking for. It's like feeding him with a fire hose, but not allowing him time to drink and take it in. And there was no questions, right? And then he'd come off. And then he'd come back and he'd natter at them some more, right? So that they were trying to produce a staff product, but it was producing a staff product for the sake of producing a staff product. The part of the analysis and the thinking and applying the forces and resources you got to solve the problem wasn't happening. So I was assigned to these guys for the whole time I was there. And one of the things that became obvious to me that I was aware of is that you don't go embarrassing these guys, superiors in front of juniors, that kind of thing. So I'm thinking, well, how do I fix this? So what I would do, I took a page out of our Canadian book, and we'd have them around the table, and we walked through a cloth model, and they wouldn't just be coming up with documents. Again, I had to work through an interpreter, and luckily I had a pretty good one, Suleiman, and he'd been an interpreter for the Americans before the Canadians got there in 2006, and he had been wounded in a gunfight, but he knew exactly what was going on. He could tell me all the students, what the peculiarities are each one of the students. And then out of the whole syndicate, there was a couple of guys I thought they shouldn't be here, but that's not my place. On the other hand, there was about 4 or 5 really bright young guys in there who got it, but they were so scared of asking a question, or if they asked the wrong question, getting hecked from the instructor, because it was that kind of relation. It's more like how you treat a private on recruit as opposed to training a staff officer. So luckily for me, the Lieutenant Colonel Senior DS in the room got called away by his general to something, to plan something. I think he was going to take over a Kandak at some point. So that's what he was getting ready for. So he was out of the picture, and I thought, okay. So what we'd done is again, I broke it down, and through the interpreter I explained, okay, we walked through all of these processes again in simple condensed terms of the MDMP, wargaming, right, IPB, right, all the intelligence preparation of the battlefield. One of the things, their named area of interest, they would express on one exercise where they had to conduct a road move from one assembly area into a tactical assembly area, and the one guy who is the G2 for that particular exercise says, my area of interest is 50 meters either side of the road, and I'm going, oh, okay, right. So it was a real quick start over, and in the time we were there to try and get it through them. And so there was an ANP captain in there. There was an ANA intelligence officer, and he was switched on. He had it. He knew what was going on. There was another infantry officer in there who had been in the Mujahideen fighting the Russians, so there was hard experience in there. And so what I wound up doing is leveraging these guys, and I would forget more of the papers and walk them through like a cloth model or a sand table or something along that line to explain the concept they're trying to grasp. And once they understood that, to explain to them that this is a problem you have to solve. It's not just fill in the sheet for the sake of filling in the sheet, because you're going to get people killed, right? Think about the problem you got to solve. And that's where I started using the experience of the guys who were already in route. The Mujahideen guy. How would you attack this position? Tell me, right? In this exercise, they're going to attack this position in an exercise, approximate platoon-sized position. Just tell me how you do it. Don't worry about what anybody else has said so far, or about what they tell you. How would you, if you were in charge and you were given total free reign to plan this, how would you do it? And he sat there for about 10 minutes, and he come up, and he just started, boom, here's where I put my base of fire, right? Here's where I put my security element, right? Here's the flank we're going to attack from. Here's the coordination points. And all of a sudden this stuff started coming out. And it was all there, it was just they were so scared to ask the question, or they may do the right thing according to doctrine or what they've been taught, but because the senior DS didn't like it, they were risk averse in their learning. So it was fortuitous that he was gone. Unfortunately, he came back for the last 2 days of the course just before the graduation. So I would let him rant, and then I would call it. I'd stop. I go, okay, and I started to get to know some of their names, and I say, okay, what do you think? And again, they all started looking at him. I go, no, it's okay. Tell me what you think. That's how you learn. Well, I might do something a little different. Well, like what? Right? Well, I might move a machine gun over here. Okay. What do you think about his? Well, and to get that to come out, and by the end, unfortunately, the 6 months previous, we weren't there for. And my personal feeling is if they'd have been run that way from the start, I think it would have had far more success. Now, when they did go, the switched on guys, I was confident that they could do a staff officer's job in a battalion, right? A battalion staff officer's job, whether it's OPSO, INTO, you name it. I was confident that the bright guys could do it. It's the other ones that I wasn't too thrilled about. And however, that's not my choice to decide who passes, who doesn't pass. So comes graduation day, and this is a big deal for those guys. There was a little auditorium in the camp, and up on the stage are these. It's like right out of a sultan's tent in there. All these gold-plated couches and very ornate stuff, and the ANA generals come and they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk some more. And then it's finally over, and they present the grads their certificates and all that. And then at the end, what I wasn't expecting is each DS mentor got called up by the syndicate, and we were given a gift of a tea set, which I've still got at home, and it's displayed, in a prominent place in my house. And I thought, wow, is this ever cool? And so one of the things we did is we made sure we had a group photo taken. And what a lot of the DS had done is we'd taken a digital photo of each syndicate and the course, which, for a Canadian staff course, it's, what's the first thing you do? Course picture. So we gave these out, and we didn't have the glossy photo stuff to print it on, but we just printed out an 8x10 color photo and gave one to each student. And you'd have thought we'd given them a sack of gold, right? That just blew me away. That just blew me away. So then, after the students go off, and again, they asked, our team leader was a full colonel. He asked a number of us to stay on because we had a list of PXR points, 5 pages long. So we stayed back, and they kept us on, and like I said, it wound up being a short tour. And we wound up writing a whole pile of stuff, which I don't know if was ever put in. But one of the things like wargaming, they had never done wargaming. You mean to tell me in 6 months of this course of MDMP, you haven't done wargaming? So again, that's something that we as the Canadian DS sat down and said, no, if it's one thing they've got to know, right? Even if it's the lowest level, they've got to at least run through 1 or 2 or 3 war games. And the first 1 and 2 were pretty iffy. I think by the third, they caught on to the idea. And again, I was explaining it. No, it's okay to make a mistake. And if you're playing the bad guy in this role, play the bad guy in this role. Yes. And why are we doing this? Right? It's to make sure that you find the problems with your plans. Right? That you've thought of as much as you can think of, so that you don't get your soldiers killed unnecessarily. Right? I think that kind of got through. As far as the actual life, I mean, Camp Suitor is a Brit camp. It was pretty cozy there. As the DS, we come in and joined on the team that was already in place. And as I said, we had our armored vehicles, and we rolled out every day, battle rattled up down into Kabul, and then stayed at the college all day and came back. One of the things that struck me as us as the new guys, and we brought it up within a day, is you were expecting, okay, here's the drills, here's the convoy drills, right? Here's action on drills, here's vehicle casualty drills. And by day 3, this hadn't happened. And so we kicked up a bit of a stink and said, no, we are going to do rehearsals on action on contact, right? Action on vehicle casualty, all that kind of stuff. And they said, no, they weren't keen on it. No, we're going to do that. And so once a week minimum, we had a down admin day, which was usually Friday. Yeah, it was Friday. Because that's when the students were off, was Friday. So that's the days we would do our drills, right? The one thing I will say is day 1 I got up there, it was off to the KMTC, to the training center, zero your weapons, make sure your weapon's functioning, make sure your marksman skill shields are up. That was good. But it surprised me that you're in a war theater here, and we got to do the action on drills. So we did that, and lo and behold, a week later, 2nd of April, were you ever up in Kabul? Okay, so you know where Camp Suitor is. Phoenix is next door.
I was there in 02.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, Suitor is where Suitor is. Camp Phoenix is the main American camp, which is east. It's maybe a click at the outside. Lo and behold, what happens first light? The front gate of Phoenix gets attacked. And it was a hell of a gunfight, went on for about a half hour. And the buggers almost made it through the front gate. And we were in the template, so there was things flying our way. And And one of the points he made is, see, that's why we do the drills, right? There was never any problem with doing drills after that, right? Which was a good thing. And we actually did an after action review. We got the film footage from the tower of that attack, and did the after action on that. And we did a complete, in our team. It wasn't just Canadians. There was 3 Germans as well, and one of them was the sergeant major. And we went and redid the whole defense plan, for the college, if the college gets attacked, and again, B, for our part of the defense of Camp Sutter, being a Brit camp, where our battle positions were if the camp comes under attack. So it was fortuitous, and it's one of them things where you want to say, I told you so, but you best just, okay, glad we did it, and leave it at that.
How do you think these 3 experiences have affected, changed you as a person, as a soldier?
As a soldier, it's made me realize the importance of professionalism and knowing what you do at all levels and knowing thoroughly what you do. And it's not a matter of, okay, I've done it, I've got the tick in the box. It's the matter of you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep challenging yourself professionally to be on top of your game as a soldier. One of the things I always said to my students when I was DS at Canadian Staff College in Kingston is I said, what you do, and I realize this is a long, hard course, and sometimes you question is, why am I doing this? But what you do at the end of the day when you become a staff officer is I said, if you're lazy, if you're lazy and you get somebody's son killed because you're lazy, I said, and I find out you're one of my students, I said, I'll come looking for you. And we'll have a discussion about what's gone on. And it's that important of what you do. This is life and death. This isn't fun and games, right? In the worst case scenario, it's life and death. The other things we do downgrade from that, but the important part is the professionalism. The other part is, for me as a person, is I served for 36 years, and I loved every second of it. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't like about it, but overall, I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I came out of it knowing that I had done something worthwhile, that what I had done in any of the number of the positions I was in on operations actually mattered, and that's a good sense of self-worth. The other thing, like I said, the downside of that is when you get back, it's, well, what are we going to do that's going to compare to this? Which when I was a commander, and Emmett and I had talked about this at length, is how do you keep them down on the farm, as far as our own soldiers are, how do you keep them down on the farm when they've seen the bright lights of the city? They've deployed on operations as a member of a full battle group. And now you're going to come back here to, a Wednesday night and a weekend a month. It's the managing of those expectations that's, even at a personal level, that's takes some getting used to. But again, on a personal level, I did something that was important, and I didn't do it for me, but I did something that was important. And the other part I had alluded to earlier is the adjusting of your expectations of the people around you, the civilians, for lack of a better term, who may be trying to understand, but no matter how you do it, you try and explain it to them, but you can't. And I've tried a number of times. And again, when I got back to work from Afghanistan, it was, well, tell us about what went on there. Tell us about this, tell us about that. And I go, well, I could try, but unless you understand the context of what's going on, you're not going to understand it. I said, I can talk to a guy who's been there. Yeah, he'll get it. He'll know exactly what I was talking about, right? So then you wind up talking about things to folks like, okay, something they'll understand. Okay, the sign on the Tim Hortons in Kandahar, 15 minutes after, if there's a rocket attack, Tim Hortons will reopen 15 minutes after the all clear. I've still got a picture of that sign somewhere at home. And it's those kind of things you explain, because the other stuff, unless they understand the context, and the background to it. And it's not their fault, they're just not going to get it. So, and the last thing I'll say is the, you know, when you've experienced third world problems, first world problems are insignificant. And it's relating that, okay? And I know it's become cliche to talk about girls going to school in Afghanistan, but I saw it in Kabul on our drive back to Suda every day on the sides of the road. There's the girls, and other than the fact that you're in Kabul, it looks like a gaggle of girls walking home from school, and they're busy chit-chatting, probably talking about boys. I don't know that, I'm guessing, but you know, whatever it is they're talking about, whoever the latest idol is, I don't know, but it's, you know, it struck me as that. But when you see their school has got armed guards on it and is covered with wire, okay, that's the other part that's hard to give somebody in Canada context to. Unless they've actually been there and seen it, you don't get the image. You don't get all the stuff that goes around with it. So other than that, that's pretty much my experience in a nutshell.
That's great. Thanks very much.